religious organization. I was raised very religiously. I felt the call to the ministry. My calling was based on everywhere I went, I was preaching, be it trees or stumps or watermelons or riding down the road. And so I get into the ministry, and when I began preaching, I preached just what I had always heard, which was condemnation, and everybody was going to hell, from the way they fixed their hair to the way they dressed to the places they attended and everything that they did. Basically, if it made you smile, it was a sin, and you had to live the long face and real religious style. And then when I started pastoring, people started coming to the church. They liked my music, the singing. They liked the preaching, I guess. They tolerated it. I still preached my religiosities, although I had people on the bench that was not qualified to join the church because of the rules. They would still attend. And I began to notice that I've got people in my church that's going to be in heaven, but they can't join my church. And I began to think, when you got a church that's holier than heaven, then you've overstepped your bounds. And what you've done is stepped outside of the love of God and into the realm of controlling other people. And the Spirit revealed to me that if the people are more important than the rules, it was Christ. If the rules are more important than the people, it's religion. Christ had no business talking to the woman at the well. Matter of fact, his own disciples marveled that he even talked with her. But yet she was more important than the rules of the Pharisees. The Pharisees condemned him for going to have lunch with Zacchaeus. He was not supposed to eat with a sinner, but yet Zacchaeus was more important to him than the rules of the Pharisees. Had Jesus just wanted a list of rules promoted, he could have floated down and stamped a seal of approval upon the Pharisees with their 613 laws and went on back to heaven. And if the rules would have saved you, he would have never died. So if it's about where you've been, it's religion. If it's about where you're going, it's Christ, because you have no past the blood. If it's about what you've done for God, it's religion. If it's about what God has done for you, it's Christ. When I couldn't save myself, he had a plan. And he told me one tree separated man from God, and one tree will bring him back. And I found that tree that brought me back into the grace and the love that God had available for me. And so I began to preach this, and I began to actually let people join the church that based on the rules were not qualified, but yet they couldn't help or couldn't change their past and their yesterday. And one of the things that I've found is when you can't change your past, the blood can cleanse it. And we began to talk about it, and I began to share with other preachers how I felt concerning these things. And one day at a breakfast, we began to talk about no more condemnation. Romans 8:1, there is therefore now no condemnation to him who is in Christ. And we began to share, and the Spirit gave me the public condemnation outline. And people were publicly condemned. And Achan and his family was stoned. And that condemnation came all the way to Christ, and they threw the woman taken in the very act of adultery, I like to say it like this, by herself, and threw her at Jesus' feet and tried to tempt him, saying that Moses in the law said she should be stoned. And Jesus told them, let the one without sin cast the first stone. This was on the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a place where he's supposed to put his foot when he returns. It's the hill that is considered the hill of life. And it was on the Mount of Olives when Jesus spoke to the woman and said, "Where art thine accusers?" She looked around and she said, "Lord, there are none." Because none have the right to judge and condemn someone else. And the only person who did have the right to condemn her was standing there with her. And out of his mouth came these words, "Neither do I condemn thee."